All right, so your literature review. You might be sitting there going, okay, what is a literature review? I just finished an annotated bibliography. My brain is still fried. I don't know what's going on. It's okay, because you've done this type of thing before, whether you've done it in college or you have done it in a different, gosh, you probably even did something like this in elementary school. It goes back that far, right? It's the concept of a book report. Now, the way that I always explain this is imagine you walk into a room and people are talking. They could be talking about anything, really. You walk over and someone's talking about something you've never really talked about before or thought about too much. And, you are, at first, you're listening, right? That's your annotated bibliography, okay? Then you've got your ideas. You're like, oh, okay, well, I'm putting these connections together. I'm starting to see how these ideas work together. I see how, people are discussing this. And that process of making connections and identifying different perspectives on, a particular issue, that's your literature review. Okay, and then to seed it in probably the overall research project, the next part, once you feel confident that you have enough information, you've made the connections that you need, that's the part where you enter the conversation, right? So that part is the actual literary research essay. So we're not there yet. We are not yet entering the conversation. So for the literature review, you're identifying ways in which these sources find common points that they discuss. Now, they can be disagreeing with each other. I mean, they could even name drop each other and say that they think that the point that this person makes is ridiculous. They can do that. That's okay, right? And that still adds more information. So what you really want to do is you want to look through, especially in your second paragraphs of your annotated bibliography, and that'll give you a really clear idea. In class the other day, someone said, well, I felt like I was being so repetitive. And you know what? That's great, because that means that your points are intersecting, right? You've got sources that are talking and communicating about similar things in different ways. So you just have to pick out those similar things that they're talking about and then develop the different ways. So the literature review essay is going to be 2 to 3 pages in length. It is not long. I will say don't wait until the last second, especially if you're confused, because you know what? As soon as you start writing, it's going to click. You are just giving the reader information about what your sources say. You are just, it's literally just parroting information that you've seen, because what you're doing, the work behind the scenes, is making those connections, right? These two sources talk about this common idea in this way. Well, these three talk about this common idea in this way. And then these two talk about it in this way, right? So it really is just about you finding things within your sources that intersect with each other and that work with each other and that build off of each other, whether they're in disagreement, whether they are in agreement, whether they are in agreement to an extent and then they kind of diverge, right? All of these things are things that you want to point out. And then you, of course, want to point out what that agreement is, or where that disagreement stems from, or where that point of divergence is, and how your authors got to a different point, right? So those are the types of things that you want to keep in mind for the literature review. This is an essay that is just giving the reader information from your sources, and it's helpful to you because later, right, all of these points of intersection are going to engage with your research question in some way. So then later, when you start, positing ideas of your own in your literary research essay, don't get that confused. Literature review is now, literary research essay is later. But when you start doing this in your literary research essay, then you'll have sources. You'll be like, oh, let me look back at my literature review. Oh, yes, this source and this source both talk about this thing. I should probably use them to kind of help figure out where I sit in this, and make sure the reader can see that, either they're in agreement with me, so they are, working together, right? Or I'm working against them, but in this valid way, and providing the evidence that, other sources think in different ways, right? So the literature review is important and beneficial to you on multiple levels. And again, I don't want to think too far ahead to the research project, but I want you to remember that this is ultimately a tool, right? This is a tool that you will get a grade on, but it is ultimately a tool. So the specs for this, 2 to 3 pages. Many people do write more. They find once they start sitting down and typing, like, oh my gosh, all these things intersect in all these different ways. Like, it clicks once you start. So that's why I say don't wait until the last second. Make sure that you don't include quotations that are longer than 3 lines of text, right? Keep them to 1 to 3 lines, because that's a narrow enough sample of the quotation for you to get your point across without having it take up a huge chunk of your 2 to 3 page essay, right? So you want to keep that in mind. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is that you always want to paraphrase and quote properly. I know that I've been hammering on about this. I know you're in a 3rd level English class in college, but I saw a lot of incorrect paraphrases and quotations as I was grading the annotated bibliography. Make sure you review those rules for paraphrasing and quotations. If you don't use them correctly, well, then you run the risk of plagiarism, and then it's a whole nother thing. So don't do that, okay? And, you know, in terms of the literature review, like I said, start early. Make sure you have the assignment requirements document next to you so that you fulfill all the requirements. Little things like you need to use all 6 of your scholarly sources. You know, that's in the assignment requirements document. I'm not going to go through it point by point because you can read it. But I pointed out the big things, the overall purpose, and kind of the overall length, which everyone is always interested in finding out. The deadline for the literature review, by the way, I had a couple of people asking, the final draft is due March 25th. But I want you to keep in mind that the draft due on March 15th is actually the deadline. The draft for anything that you write for me is going to be the best product that you can make for this assignment without any additional guidance from me, without any additional guidance from your peers during peer review. You know, so the draft of the 15th is the goal that you want to set. You don't want to turn in, like, no offense, but garbage on the 15th. And then have a lot of work to do to catch up for the 25th. Because guess what? The better product you can get to me on the 15th, the better comments I can give you, the better comments your peers can give you, and then the better your revisions will be for the final draft. You set yourself up for success by planning for the draft, not by planning for the final draft. All right, so that's just my little teacher pitch right at the end there. Hopefully you have a little bit of a better understanding of how the literature review works, how it sits in the scholarly conversation, right? You've gathered your intel, you're now putting the pieces together and figuring it out, and then later in the next essay, you'll be inserting your own opinion and figuring out where you stand and how you can use the information you've learned to help make that clearer, right? But right now we're finding out how the pieces work together. That's what we're doing. And if you have any questions about this, please let me know. All right, see you guys.